So we're really, really pleased to have with us Dr. Ozernov-Palchik. So she is a postdoctoral fellow at MIT's McGovern Institute, where she applies neuroimaging, psychoeducational, and cognitive methods to study mechanisms of compensation in dyslexia. As an interesting aside, she's twice been an immigrant, and she fluently speaks 3 languages, and she's going to talk to us today about earlier identification of dyslexia. Ola.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here today. Okay, so the majority of children who have reading difficulties at the end of 3rd grade will continue to struggle with reading by the end of high school. So why is that? One of the reasons is that we intervene too late. Currently, dyslexia is not diagnosed until about 2nd or 3rd grade. This is when children are expected to know how to read and start to transition from learning to read to reading to learn. This model has issues because current research shows that interventions are more effective earlier on in schooling. Furthermore, as many of the speakers alluded to, the struggle to learn how to read is associated with a range of socio-emotional difficulties for the child. So what can we do about it? We need reliable means of identifying dyslexia risk before failure occurs. We conducted a longitudinal study with the aims to identify best behavioral and brain predictors of developmental dyslexia. We went to 21 diverse schools in New England and administered a short battery of assessments to kindergarten children. The study is a collaboration between John Gabrielli and Dr. Nadine Gabb at Boston Children's Hospital. And after we administered a short battery of assessments, we invited a subset of the children to come in for brain imaging at MIT, and then we tested them again longitudinally at the end of 2nd grade, when identification of dyslexia is already possible. I would need to give a much longer talk to describe how we got kindergarten children to lie still inside an MR scanner for 45 minutes. But we successfully were able to image 180 children for this study and hundreds of children across other studies, as Rachel and Joanna described. So what did we find? So first of all, we found that risk looks different in different children. We used a data-driven approach in 1,200 students that we administered a short battery of pre-literacy assessments to identify distinct profiles of performance on those measures. And what we found is that we had 6 groups that emerged from the data. The first group was the average performer group. The second group was the high performer group. And then we had 4 risk groups. Strikingly, when we followed up on these children 2 years later, we had 100% stability in group membership. When we looked at those groups more in depth and across time, interesting patterns emerged. So for example, 2 of the risk groups were overrepresented in lower socioeconomic status schools. One of the risk groups had oral language difficulties, and only one of the 4 risk groups showed a profile of developmental dyslexia when we followed them at the end of 2nd grade. So it looks like behavioral measures were not very specific in identifying true risk. So we turned to the brain. And before I describe our brain findings, let me briefly introduce you to the reading brain. So if you see in this figure, there are multiple systems that are involved in reading. I'm going to highlight 2 of them. The regions in orange are regions that support phonological processing. In red is the visual word form area. So this is a region that becomes specialized for reading and identifying letters and words as we learn how to read. And both of those regions are key for reading acquisition. When we looked at our brain difference and at our neuroimaging data, what we found is that children who were at phonological risk had lower volume, so lower size, and different properties in the arcuate fasciculus. This is a white matter pathway that supports the processing in the phonological regions I showed you before. So for example, you can see on the left there is the arcuate fasciculus, so it's the white matter pathway in a child who scored 0 on blending words. And blending words is a child who were asked to blend k, at together to make cat. And on the right there you see a child who scored 10 on that measure. So we know that brain differences in children who are at risk for dyslexia are present in kindergarten before children start learning how to read formally. The question is now, can we use those information to distinguish between children who will have reading difficulties later on? And so because the visual word form area is a key region for reading development, we chose it as our target region to investigate whether activation in this region to letters is different in at-risk children. We found that it wasn't. What we did find was that activation in this region was reduced, attenuated in children who were at risk in kindergarten and developed reading difficulties in second grade as compared to children who were at risk in kindergarten and had typical reading in second grade. So it looks like brain measures are more sensitive than behavioral measures at identifying true risk. So our next steps in the lab is to better understand how we can put this knowledge together to predict reading outcomes when the outcomes are still unknown in a new group of children. We also continue our deep exploration of individual differences in dyslexia and dyslexia risk, using both behavioral and neuroimaging measures. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much, Ola. So in our final lightning talk, we're going to hear from Seema and Suraj Korumilli. When they aren't busy being students at Northeastern University, these twins launch libraries around the globe through the literacy movement for more. Very impressive. They founded it at age 13. But did you know that Seema can also whistle with her mouth closed? And that Suraj's love of libraries is so intrepid that he even warded off an angry canine to launch a library in a remote Greek town. Seema and Suraj.
Yeah. Hello? Oh, okay.
Testing. Yeah.
Yeah, we're the only pair of kids on here. So,
Yeah.
first of all, thank you for that spectacular introduction, and thank you everybody for having us here today. Hopefully, we provide a little bit of a break in between all the scientific talks today. I'm Seema.
I'm Suraj, and today we're going to talk about the Literacy Movement for More and how we enable literacy on the ground. We're a nonprofit. So, yeah, ready to go?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the summer before my sister and I turned 14 years old, we visited our ancestral home in India. It's called Korumilli, and our last name is Korumilli. So the experience, to say the least, was transformational because we're visiting our hometown. And we decided that we needed some way to tie ourselves back to this place that was so integral to our identity. So ultimately, we decided to build a library there. Over the course of that year, that one library evolved into our full-fledged organization, Literacy Movement for More. Our mission is to promote literacy on a global scale through the construction of library and provision of crucial education materials, such as technology, school supplies, and obviously books. Over the last 5.5 years, we've created 8 libraries across 3 continents, donated thousands of books, and we've worked with dozens of institutions to help provide on-the-ground literacy to those who need it the most.
Now, we could talk forever about all of our numbers, but today we wanted to focus on a story. So when Suraj and I were constructing our first library in Kapaleshwarpuram, India, back in like 2014, we had met this brilliant young man. His name is Arjun, and he's the one who's totally beaming in the front over there. And he was quick-witted and confident and intelligent and just seemed to have this never-ending curiosity about how the world around him worked. I think his tendencies were towards reading anyway, and he always gravitated towards the library. So we were told he'd read a good portion of the 600 books we had donated to the library initially. Over the years, we were always keen to hear updates about Arjun because, he had started taking a special place in our hearts.
That's why 3 years ago, we were ecstatic when we learned that Arjun actually he landed a chemical engineering seat in his local university, the first in his cohort to do so. And we were even more surprised and excited when we learned that his interest in chemistry was brought because we donated a chemistry textbook in our first batch of books. And he was incredibly optimistic about his future, and we were happy to help him. We'll be there for him.
Arjun's story is just one of so many others that have become the fuel to our mission. We recognize that real sweeping changes begin at the ground level first, which is why we've worked tirelessly to develop effective strategies that make our efforts on the field all the more worth it. So our operations can be split into 3 dimensions, the first of which deals with the physical donation of books and creation of libraries. Our model works a little bit like this. So first we come into contact with partner institutions that are in need of our services and usually have some sort of foundational infrastructure in place to house donations. So our job is to provide the other bits that can house the rest of the book, so stuff like shelving and bins. And after a vetting process, we move along with the transportation of the materials to the target locations, where we continue to work with the partner institutions in really building and integrating the library with the community. Our vision for the future is to not only scale our transportation efforts and start fundraising initiatives for the construction of our own library buildings, but with our own proprietary libraries, we hope to not only house the donations, but we want them to act as true community centers with resources that are accessible to the public.
The next dimension that we want to focus on is technology. It's no surprise that virtual libraries are the future. I myself have built a database and control that has over 700 ebooks downloaded for free, and that is way easier to transport than than hundreds of books. You can trust us on that. Tablets, I guess to talk about this, we have to talk about how we procure tech donations. Currently, we get independent donations, or we go to public school systems that phase out their old technology. But now we want to move up. We want to target corporations that can give us mass donations. In regards to our software, we also want to include analytics so that we can start recording and measuring our educational impact.
So the final dimension we focus on is arguably the most important, and I think a lot of the focus of the discussion today, which is the sustainability of our literacy initiatives. So, all of our efforts would really go to waste if the libraries and books started collecting dust. So to stop that from happening, we give a lot of credit to the industrious teachers and mentors and caretakers who we've worked with to ensure that, the libraries are in full use and prime condition.
I think our story is pretty cool. We're just a couple of young adults with a passion for reading, and we love to help people read. Whether that be through libraries, digital technology, or providing access to basic educational materials, we've always believed in books.
The stories that aren't quite as clear just yet are those of the people we've touched so far. A toddler who picked up their first picture book, grandparents who read stories to their grandchildren, a student who reached for an off-kilter textbook like Arjun. His story and so many more are just getting started. Thank you for your time, and if you'd like to discuss any more ideas with us, you can find us during downtime. Thank you.
Thank you.